When you are a beginner in electronics, you need a kind of basic set of instruments in your electronic lab. And this video is about what you need for an electronic lab, and then I mean the minimum things that you need. At first you need an analog Ampere Volt Ohms meter. You also need a digital analog Volt Ohms meter. And the reason why you need both an analog and a digital voltmeter is the way they measure voltage or current differs. You will surely find out experimentally that you get different readings sometimes when you read on an analog voltmeter or on a digital voltmeter. So you need both of them. You also need a sine wave oscillator, and it's very easy to make such a sine wave oscillator yourself. The ideal situation is that you have a sine wave oscillator that works between 1 Hz and 600 kHz. But other sine wave oscillators like this, for instance, work up to 500 kHz, and that's quite good. And the reason is, when you want to experiment with radios, the sine wave that you need is 455 kHz on the medium wave transformer. So 600 kHz or even more, perhaps 1 MHz, that's perfect. You also need a square wave oscillator, and a square wave oscillator is very easy to make. There are a lot of schematics on my channel. Here you see a square wave oscillator that I've made, and it also generates a triangle wave. It works up to 20 kHz approximately. That's quite good, because a square wave has a lot of harmonics. And the reason is, when you use such a square wave oscillator in a radio circuit, you will always find the harmonics on higher frequencies. So the triangle wave oscillator is also here, homebrew. Do you need it? Well, I don't know. Perhaps it's useful. Of course you need a power supply. You need in fact a power supply that can make 3 ampere up to 50 volts or 1 ampere, and here you see a very simple power supply. It can only deliver approximately 1 ampere, but it works up to 30 volts, and that's quite good. In your experiments you need a power supply that can go up minimal to 30 volts, but 40 volts is much better. And you must be able to set the voltage completely variable. That's very, very important. Here you see the knob with which I do that, always in my experiments on YouTube. Completely variable, and you can see that here, because your electronic circuits can act very different on different supply voltages, and even a difference of 0.8 volts or 1 volt can make the difference. So you must use a power supply that can set all voltages in between. And then your oscilloscope here is your best friend when you want to do radio experiments and all kinds of other experiments. For instance, you send into your amplifier a complete pure sine wave made by this sine wave oscillator, and in the end at the loudspeaker you find a completely distorted signal. So the oscilloscope is the only instrument that can help you in this case to solve the problem, and in many other cases. Of course, you also need a soldering iron. I use 2 of them. This is one from 40 watts. You also need a soldering iron from 100 watts. And the reason is that when you want to solder to metal plates that take away a lot of heat, you need a quite hot soldering iron with, of course, solder. In practice you will need such a big soldering iron, though it can ruin, of course, sensitive and say very tiny electronic circuits. So don't use it in that case. Soldering paste fluid is also very useful. In many cases this soldering fluid is not advised, but I use it in when I want to solder to big iron plates or so. Then use this paste or fluid. Wipe it off, of course, because it's acid, so not good for electronic components. And of course also you need in your home laboratory, your electronic lab, that's the aim of this video, a resistor bank. Very useful. Here you see a resistor bank that was made with car lamps. They are all switched in series, but with crocodile clips. Here you can use these resistor banks as in a parallel function, and that means that you can load transformers or amplifiers, etc. with a certain load that the amplifier needs or the transformer needs. I've made a lot of videos on my YouTube channel where I have explained how you can use such a simple resistor bank. You can also make that from a resistor wire from a hairdryer or so. Very useful in experiments with transformers, etc. And finally you need 3 typical transistors. I always use these types of transistors: BC547 NPN, BC557 PNP, BD139 NPN, BD140 PNP, 2 and 3055 NPN, and there is also a PNP version from that transistor. I don't know the exact name, but it's surely there. And here you see these transistors that I always use in experiments. I can advise everyone to use these types, because with these transistors your circuits have a high success rate. All these transistors work very properly because of their good properties and their high amplification factor. So that was all to tell about the basics that you need for an electronic lab. Of course, much more things are usable. Here you see all my electronic components that I have in store. Especially the resistors are perhaps interesting. I've sorted them out only on the basis of their color. So this is brown, for instance, and all the resistors with a brown ring at their end are in this box. In the past I've sorted them out much more precisely, but that didn't work so well when I did all kinds of experiments. All kinds of screws, etc., etc. The power supply again. So I hope I've made this video in such a way that everyone that's interested in electronics can make a kind of basic circuit, basic set of things necessary to do experiments.